Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to have a few more people join. We'll give it a few minutes. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So thank you all for joining and taking the time to join us here for this month's honoring for the Native American and Indigenous Heritage Month. Just a little bit of background. This event is brought to you by the Peace Health Caregiver Affinity Group and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We also have it collaborated with the Tribal Alliance Group, which is across the Peace Health Network. And much of the work with the Tribal Alliance Group is to build trust and partnership with tribal nations that we work directly with in our Peace Health facilities across the Pacific Northwest and into Oregon areas. And I will just introduce myself. So my name is Nayenike Gorman. I am from Steamboat, Arizona, born and raised on the Navajo Nation. And my clans are Bitani Yinishle, No Da'an na Kaidine and Bashichin, Ashkan Hitohe Dashiche, Todachi ni Dashanella. So usually when I introduce myself from myself as a spirit person and to another, we introduce who we are and who we come from and our bloodline and what we represent. So I am, in that way, that's how I introduce myself to you. So I am Diné and Cheyenne. Much of the work that I do is around community health and community building, and I have a wide passion for public health. So I am working closely with Peace Health Network and leadership to provide spaces and create spaces for cultural competency and cultural sovereignty, and for us to be able to build more leadership and more support for one another, and especially those that we help in our communities, and for the tribal affiliates and the tribal nations and the Indigenous people that come to us for the help. And we want to build better care and build more knowledge around Indigenous health and incorporate much of that work into our everyday lives and into our everyday caregiving, especially with inpatient and outpatient care. So I would like to just open this up in reading here some of our goals with Peace Health and the Tribal Alliance Group. We hope that the work we do here today will contribute to the health and recovery of this place and the restoration of the sovereignty of the Native people whose land we are on. Following this welcome and introduction, I would like to open up the space with a land acknowledgement and an opening blessing. So before we open up the space, we always want to recognize the lands that we are on. So this means that the lands that we are traditionally utilizing and for our home and our housing, our family and our community, we just want to acknowledge that this is on Native lands and sovereignty land. We Peace Health acknowledge we provide are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Native people who have been the spiritual caretakers of these lands since time immemorial. The Indigenous way of life, cultural values, and respect for the land and waterways are alive, strong, and resilient. We honor and accept the responsibility of being in continuous healing relationships as one people. So at this time, I would like to invite Beth to open us up in a reflection and blessing, and for her to introduce herself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I am Beth Boyd. I'm Blackfeet and Sioux, originally from Montana. Been here most of my adult life in Whatcom County, and really blessed to be in some of the most beautiful lands ever. So prior to our blessing, I just want to, for those of you that don't understand, for those of you that it might be a first time, but to take with you and remember that Indigenous people, we refer to ourselves maybe often just by our tribal affiliation. It could be Alaska Native, American Indian, Native American. On reservations, sometimes people will reference in joking ways about how they identify themselves. So keep them all in mind. It's like not one is right and neither are wrong. So just keep that in mind. So as we gather here today, set everything aside that, you might be thinking, oh, I should be doing. Oh, what about that person? Oh, I have another patient to deal with. It's like set that aside and just bring yourself to this gathering. And I will share with you some words. God, power of all, comfort for all, you come by many names. May you bless us in this gathering. May we all be granted an understanding of the sharing done today. May our hosted speaker be blessed and protected in her sharing of knowledge with us this day. Let our ears be open to the words shared. May our hearts be filled with the love we gain. May our minds and spirits come in unison to take away the gifts we are given this day, and may these gifts lead us to a greater understanding. Amen.
Thank you, Beth, for that reflection and blessing. And I would like to have a special thank you for your work that you do and the support that you do for the Tribal Alliance Group, and always helping aid and guide us in the work that we continue to build with our Peace Health Network and the communities.
Thanks for saying that, Nye.
Thank you. So I just want to be able to set the intention of the space before we continue on introducing our special guest. As we continue to pioneer and reach out to build better spaces to create healing and equity in our shared communities and healthcare, we find that one of the key components to provide these spaces is amplifying equity. So equity promotes healing in communal spaces, build better educational spaces, build relationships, shift change, and honors creation. One of the many ways to build equity is by honoring and recognizing relations with Indigenous and First Nations people who have much to share and unite in creating proper honoring of living harmonious lifestyles that improves our caregiving work. And for the Native Indigenous Heritage Month, it is a special time to highlight education and create platforms to share stories, teachings, traditions, and important pioneering work that contribute to First Nations people. By recognizing Native Indigenous Heritage Month is to share the interior work on honor trust responsibilities, and special commitments to Indigenous people. And I would like to introduce our special guest here today. Her name is Yakaiste Gorman. She is a behavioral health coordinator at Northwest Indian College. So in this session, we will get to hear about Yakaiste's work founding the college's first behavioral health program that prioritizes Indigenous health, knowledge, and heritage. And we can go ahead and see more about Yakaiste. So the Northwest Indian College alumni Yakaiste Gorman is originally from Steamboat, Arizona, of the Navajo Cheyenne tribes. She is the first daughter of 8 children to Beverly and Emerson Gorman. Yakaiste is a young Indigenous scholar, mother, and wife who strives to learn more about how to preserve inherent rights for future generations through higher education. Along with learning her foundational traditional knowledge of Navajo teachings, she is self-taught in traditional herbal medicine, holistic healing, and food sovereignty. She grew up with a father who was known as a traditional medicine man and a mother who worked for Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health as a researcher. Raised in a traditional hogan without running water or electricity, she Navajo spoken as their first language and raised with Navajo structural influence. She learned the importance of traditional values and knowledge as it connects to sense of place, as well as the person she would become to help her surrounding communities. Having learned the importance of healing and medicine from both spectrums of traditional and Western medicine, she has worked in different capacities, such as a family health liaison for Johns Hopkins Center for Indian Health, wellness coordinator, and is an environmental science instructor, as well as a behavioral health program coordinator and interim community health aid coordinator. Her work brings diversity of cultural competency and cultural safety to curriculum development for future health professionals within her programs. So at this time, I would like to invite Yakaiste Gorman onto the panel and have her also introduce herself to each of you here joining us. Yakaiste, thank you.
Yat shik dosh dina no khano yahadi. She ya yos katkista nanapa gorman yunsha. But ani nishle ado no da ana kaidina bashichin. Hushka an zo de shichet origini dashnale. Shema do shija Beverly do Emerson Gorman Wilya. Hoyet det nasha. Hello, my name is Yakaiste Gorman. I am Navajo and Cheyenne from Arizona. I currently work as a behavioral health program coordinator for Northwest Indian College. I'm alumni to Northwest Indian College, and my work is to really bring together the curriculum of Indigenous knowledge systems into behavioral health work, and currently working on a community health aid model. I think this would be a good time to share my our program here at Northwest Indian College. So Northwest Indian College has a behavioral health aid program that we're working on. And the point of this program is to really look at how an individual goes through education and indigenizing that education. Here's a little bit about myself, my clans, and this is a picture of me coming of age. So what I like to do is frame my work in when is the moment that you decided that you wanted to become something, or something was really important to you. And I pinpoint this picture as one of those times. Coming of age meant that you become a leader, you become somebody who thinks beyond themselves, right? And this is a time when you start to begin to think about family, you begin to think about community. So these are different milestones that we kind of look at in terms of our curriculum and how we build it. a little bit of background, as everyone knows, you know, in light of Native Heritage Month. When you look at these pictures here, these are historic pictures when it comes to impacts of colonization. And the reason behind, you know, putting these pictures here is to really highlight the journey that Indigenous people have been on here in this continent and all over the world. You can see that on the upper right-hand side, Indian land for sale. So when we look at how we frame these ideas of what is for sale or what is being used in terms of resources and health equity, many of these ads highlight colonization. And, you know, when it comes to an Indigenous people, if you think about plants, right? Many of us know invasive plants and then native plants. You can think of it in a sense where invasive plants take over the native plants and they start to develop in that place. And then the native plants become extinct or they're no longer there. And so in a way, colonization is that same concept when it comes to what has happened to Indigenous people. And so moving on from that, you know, there has been a lot of colonization and progression. So these are a couple of statistics and numbers for everyone to reflect on. So in 1800s, Europe controlled 35% of the Earth's surface. And in 1878, this had increased to 67%. And so you can see that the progression of colonization was very rapid and very quick. Between 1878 and 1915, the period of new imperialism was happening, and European control extended over 84% of Earth's surface. And I like to use these as models, the pictures here, the upper right hand. The Bozeman Trail is very, I would say, famous when it comes to expansion westward. And what had happened in this era was tribes were moved westward. And so when the trail was made, many plant life didn't survive because of how deep the wagons were cutting deep into the earth. And so a big part of colonization is really looking at where the history was, what happened to the vegetation, what happened to the people, how did we come to where we're at today? And I think a lot of times when we look at history, right, there's highlighted history points where there are things that are overlooked, or there's only like one paragraph or one page specific to Native people. And so really learning about colonization and how it affects us today and how it affects our health, this is a huge part. And then going into the second picture below, when it comes to a people and when it comes to the survival of that people, a huge part is food, right? And this picture was taken when Native people were being taken off their lands. And you can't really see the depiction of what these are, but these are skulls of buffalo. And they were killed off because they wanted the Native people to become reliant on commodity foods. They wanted them to come to the government to be able to eat. And as we know now, you know, or we might know, many of our foods today have a lot of preservatives. They have a lot of things that aren't good for our health. And so in light of that, you know, looking at this picture here, it really highlights what has happened to a native food source here in this continent. And you know, when we think of ourselves as human beings and we look at things like this, right? I know that in each one of us, there's a piece of our heart that says, I would never do this to an animal. I would never do this to another human being or take from them, right? And so that's the part where it comes into equity, you know, that part of our heart that we give to be able to reverse colonization or retraditionalized community. And so the aftermath of all that, right? After food sources were taken, after Native people had been pushed westward or south, wherever they were, right? Colonization through non-Indigenous economy came. And if you look at this poster here, it says, "Come to Denver, the chance of your lifetime," right? And so it meant selling this idea that you had to move off reservation in order to have a chance at something good. And so that is the narrative that we kind of look at when it comes to Native people. You know, it says good jobs, happy homes, training, beautiful Colorado. And there's many different posters that are like this that Native people had moved away to be able to provide for their families. When we look at economy, this has a very big part in terms of our health and the way that, you know, how we function on a day-to-day basis. And these are some of the concepts that we look at in our behavioral health aid program, is that we're looking at the impacts of a people and what resources they have within their communities. How far away do they have to travel in order to, you know, reach some sort of sustenance, whether it be a hospital, a clinic, a food resource, a food bank, whatever it is, right? And so through acculturation and assimilation, those types of things kind of bridged a gap between Indigenous people's way of living and the way that we used to be, and how progressive it is now, right? If you look around your room right now, how many of the things within your distance come from the earth? If I could get that in the chat, how many things can you count that come from the earth? Anybody? So when we think about acculturation and assimilation, many things that we don't think about is the production of things and how things came to be where they're at. And for Indigenous people, this came through Relocation Act, through boarding schools, through trauma, and then not really being able to express those things, right? A lot of us say that to be able to express what's going on with you is healthier than keeping it in. And so if you think about, you know, Native people in this time, in this age, there are many things that are finally being able to be discovered, right? One of the things is boarding school. Some of the things is trauma. Other things would be historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, the epidemiology that is happening on reservations and off reservations. So these are all things that we take into consideration when we're building our program here at Northwest Indian College. So here's a highlight of Northwest Indian College. When Northwest Indian College was built, it is a tribal college and university, and it was founded in 1973 as Lummi Indian School of Aquaculture. And so this was to help Indigenous people become sufficient in their resources, that be operated fish and shellfish hatcheries, being able to learn a little bit more about how their treaties and their policies play into what they do on a daily basis. And it really gave power to Indigenous people to educate their own. And so today, Northwest Indian College is known as a tribal college that offers associate's degrees transferable to any four-year university, as well as bachelor's degrees such as Native Environmental Science, Tribal Governance and Business Management, Chemical Dependency, and many others. And this was all possible looking at our mission statement. Through education, Northwest Indian College promotes Indigenous self-determination and knowledge. And so what that means is really looking at the history of our Indigenous people. Why was this college created? Part of the reason why Northwest Indian College was created to create a foundation for Indigenous people to educate their own, to be able to practice their sovereignty, to be able to bring back and revitalize what has been taken through acculturation, through assimilation, through colonization. And so the vision statement, our commitment to our students is really to look at how we can advance tribal sovereignty, how we can teach our students to have these teachings. And so all that to say, we built a behavioral health aid program in technical arts, and this really embodies a clinical instruction for positive learning environments for adult learners, learning about self-directed leadership, communal responsibility, Indigenous values and ethics, and then what that responsibility looks like on a reservation or working with tribal entities. And it really enhances the tribal healthcare because it creates a diverse economic opportunity for our tribal people. And I really like to highlight, you know, when I talk to my students that I teach, the first thing I ask in class is, how many of you are here because you want to help your community? And all of their hands go up. And so in the chat, or participants that are here, how many of you are here because you want to help this community? Let me see a show of hands. So when we look at how our tribal college functions, how all of us are here, right? It's not just about tribal communities. We have everyone who is Indigenous from different places. And a lot of it comes from the heart and really understanding what is our purpose. And so with that, our Enwit core beliefs come in, right? So our first core belief, and I won't say the names, but these are part of our core beliefs that can be found on the Enwit website. The first one is, our strength comes from our old people. From them, we receive our teachings, knowledge, and advance for our daily lives. And the way that I like to interpret this is, as children, we learn a lot from our parents, our grandparents, and we learn a lot about morals, ethics, norms. All of those things really become a core of who you are. The second one, we are responsible for protecting our territory. This means taking care of our land and our water and everything that's on it and in it. And so each one of us, we all live on this earth. We all have a responsibility to protect this place, whether it be picking up trash or whether it be, you know, going out and doing ceremony for that place. The third one, our culture is our language. We should strengthen and maintain our language. A huge part of that is, you know, when I look at my students in these programs, it's a huge part where we talk about, how do you come into a community that you know nothing about, or another tribe if you're visiting a different tribe, right? One of the things that is so important is knowing a piece of your history, knowing part of your language. And this was very prominent in our teachings as Indigenous people. When it came to me and how I learned, you know, one of the biggest things that really impacted my life was how many languages my dad knew and how he was able to introduce himself in those languages. And this really set a foundation, a precedent, you know, to be able to connect with different communities. So there's different types of stories like that that we can kind of draw from. The fourth one, taking care of ourselves, watching out for ourselves, love and taking care of one another. This is a huge one when it comes to community, right? We've seen within the pandemic, many changes in people, right? And the biggest thing is we have to look back at our own core beliefs. What do we value? Why are we learning how to take care of ourselves? And the biggest component of that is really learning about how you take care of yourself is how you're going to take care of someone else. And a big part of that is really learning about, what is it that I need to take care of in myself to be better? And then that comes to the last one, life balance, sacred. So viewing yourself as somebody who's sacred, you're being able to transform that and see someone else as sacred. But that even goes into our relationships, not just with human beings, but with the plant life, with our animals, with the sea, the ocean, the water, the sea life. And so all of these different things kind of come to light when it comes to that balance. Everyone has a place, everyone has a story. And so this is a piece of my teaching model when I teach my classes when it comes to the behavioral health aid program. A lot of it embodies many of these components here: identity, history, looking at self-direction and leadership. How do we become leaders? Looking at cultural competency. So if a student is learning about mental health from a cultural perspective, how do we keep that knowledge safe so that that student doesn't feel exploited and that everyone can kind of understand where that student's coming from? Language, a big part is learning how to introduce themselves. So if they go into a visiting tribe, how do they introduce themselves to that tribe? How do you represent yourself outside of your own family or your own community? And then relationality. This is a huge one. When it comes to students that come through the program, they're really learning about how to create networks, how to create relationships with people and maintain that. And the biggest part is working with Indigenous people who have had that history of institutions coming in and taking children, institutions that didn't really look at our well-being or our health. And so part of this program is to help immerse that type of teaching into our students. So this is how I like to break it down. When it comes to our psychological basic needs, each and every one of us, we exhibit these 4 things. 1, we have to have control within our life. Our self-esteem is very important if we want to be successful or we want to do certain things. Meaningfulness. This is a huge part of our life when it comes to doing meaningful work. How many of you have ever cooked for somebody that you loved and felt fulfilled after? Show of hands. Yeah, so this creates meaningfulness, right? If you know that you're doing something that is going to be better, or you're leaving the world better than you found it, then that creates a really good foundation for yourself. And then belongingness. This is so important when it comes to creating relationships, having family, having community. And so one thing I always like to say is everyone has a story. Everyone has a sense of place. You just have to work to find it. And education is a lifelong process, and it's a transformational one. A part of it might be that you get to a certain point and you're so exhausted, you're so tired, but the part that's going to get you through might be one of these concepts, might be meaningfulness, might be belongingness, or your self-esteem that pushes you through. And so all of these basic needs begin with you. And so you have to exhibit these things to be able to put it outward to your family, put it outward to your community, and then the world, right? And I always like to look at this model as a piece of, how a ripple effect happens. And it reminds me of a study that was done, right? When somebody smiles at somebody else, they smile back, and then they go about their day and they smile at somebody else, right? And so that's a ripple effect of all these different people. So in this moment, I hope that you guys are all smiling. Okay, so our foundational courses at Northwest Indian College, these are all courses that help a student be able to transfer to a 4-year university. A huge part of our work is making sure that students are created and afforded the opportunities if they decide to go further in their career. So we set them up with NWIC foundational courses, which is the CSOV series, Introduction to Cultural Sovereignty, Language of Our Ancestors, Reclaiming Our History. And all of these go through the history of Indigenous people, policies. They look at the treaties, they look at the laws, and they also look at language as a big piece. And then required ATA courses, so associate's degree courses that get transferred to different universities. That would be introduction to computers, interpersonal communication, introduction to successful learning. A lot of our students might come in and they haven't gone to school for maybe, 2-3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and they're able to go through this introduction to successful learning, and it's really tailored to help an adult learner be able to successfully get through college, whether it be learning about scholarship programs, getting into graduate school, writing their personal statement, looking for scholarship opportunities, and then really looking at how do I do a budget on how I get through school. How many of us have ever had that when we went through college? So a big part is really setting a student up for success. And then we have math and English composition. And then these are the behavioral health aid program core requirement courses. As you can see, we have behavioral health courses, we have human services courses that go through everything from taking care of yourself, chemical dependency, family, group facilitation, counseling, airborne pathogens, relapse prevention, multicultural counseling. We have psychology to balance everything out. And so this is what a student will go through to get their certification. So behavioral health aid program overview. This takes about 24 months minimum to become a behavioral health aid 1 and behavioral health aid 2 to get the certificate for behavioral health aid 1 and behavioral health aid 2. And this will be under the behavioral health program, ATA. And so this is a hybrid online course for an associate's in technical arts, 98 credits. And the requirements that we put there are so that students are able to transfer to any four-year university. And the core requirement courses for the behavioral health aid 1 and 2, this is a certificate that students get through Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, who certify students to be able to work within IHS and Circular 2006 clinics. So they're particularly working with Indigenous people. And so that's why the program is tailored to Indigenous history and those types of things. So the behavioral health aid program overview, each student is required to reach out to the cultural department. And a huge part of this is looking at cultural orientation as a part of understanding their community, their place within that community, and the core beliefs behind that community. If they're a visiting tribe, they still are required to reach out to the local cultural department and become acquainted with the community there. And this really helps with cultural orientation when it comes to each student. And it really helps when it comes to them being able to help the community. Students learn how to introduce themselves in their language as a part of cultural protocol and connecting to other tribes. And then the degree plan aids a student if they're interested. All these courses can transfer into the bachelor's degree for community advocates and responsive education. An additional 2 to 3 quarters after they're done with their required courses for behavioral health, they can go back to Northwest Indian College, get an additional 2 to 3 quarters and get a Washington State certification for SUD. And so student success is a huge part of our program and a part of our college. So these are some of the resources that we have at Northwest Indian College. We have the student connection, which really helps with anything that a student needs. So they really are the networks for our math and writing center, for getting student accommodations, for learning about the college experience. We also have student support for mental health counseling. 2 of these things are talk space. And then we have a number that students can call at any time, 24/7, if they need someone to talk to. And we also have a student mental health counselor that sets up appointments and they can meet with that counselor. So I'll leave it open for questions now. And yeah, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Yakaiste, for your wonderful presentation. I just want to take this moment to appreciate you and the work that you are doing at the Northwest Indian College, and want to acknowledge that the behavioral health program that you are creating and providing for students, that we are grateful that you are doing that, especially because it's the first in the country and the first at Northwest Indian College. And especially because it's so close to one of our Peace Health networks, we only hope to continue to build alliance and relationship with the students that work and go to school at Northwest Indian College. And with this amazing work that you're pioneering, it's creating more and more students with that education and with that background to build and better the Western medicine and to change it to honor our Indigenous ways of life and our Indigenous practitioner work. So thank you for that. And the Tribal Alliance Group just definitely wants to extend our gratitude for the work that you are bringing to our caregivers and the words that you have shared, and also the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so at this time, we're going to have a couple of question and answers. So one of the questions for you is, how many students complete the 24-month-long certification a year?
So currently we had our first cohort begin in January 2022. And we have 10 students that are halfway through their courses, and they're doing excellent. And I really like the comment that Pamela had, that set of, the work that we do here at the college is really setting that intention for our students to be able to have that foundational learning and setting the student up for success. And I feel like, when we go through education, sometimes it feels like we're not getting enough care at all. And, for Northwest Indian College, a huge part is making sure that our students come out of the degree feeling like they have purpose, feeling like they have something to do in the world that will change. And, it's not just my work and things that I do. I couldn't have done it without Northwest Indian College and a couple of people that we have at the college that really set that tone. Specifically is like our teaching and learning team, Brandon Morris, Don McCluskey, and Greg Mollahy. Brandon Morris is the department chair for the tribal governance and business management. And then Greg Molly is the department chair for our care program. And then Donald McCluskey, he is a faculty for the Native Studies leadership at Northwest Indian College. And so they really frame and talk about the intention of the college, why our students are there, and then how we can teach, non-Native people how our college is and how we promote tribal sovereignty.
Thank you. So another question here is, what do you offer to Native people who might be affected by fetal alcohol and also have bipolar diagnosis, who can learn, but learn in different ways, have an underlying high intelligence?
So for students who come through Northwest Indian College, we have a great team with our student services. and they will reach out to our Dean of Students, and she will help with student accommodation. So we have all of our classes are tailored so that students will have audio. If there's any type of challenges that they might be having, our faculty are more than happy to help tackle those issues with them and really help the student feel like they can get through the college experience, getting something out of it.
And I have one question from me. What are some ways that you envision a better partnership between local Western medicine hospital facilities who are not on tribal nations and with tribal nations? What does that partnership look like to you, and what are your thoughts on building that partnership?
I think the biggest part is just really having like cultural orientation, right? So a lot of people that do come to Northwest Indian College, the atmosphere and the culture of Northwest Indian College is a lot different. And really the biggest part is how we treat our students is like a family, and community is a huge part of that. And I think, creating relationships outside of Northwest Indian College, whether it be with, Peace Health or any other clinic that's out there, I think that a huge part of that is giving cultural orientation. Where are Indigenous people coming from? And something that others can help us is really by, looking into the history, really reading and being intentional about how you're decolonizing your work and how health equity, what does that mean to the surrounding clinics of tribal colleges or tribal reservations.
Thank you for sharing. And just one more question was, have you seen enrollment grow in the last 5 years?
Yes, so this past quarter, we actually had our record number of students that enrolled at Northwest Indian College, and our retention rate has been very, very good. So yeah, I think that we're really doing our job in trying to make sure that students are staying with their programs, that they're being supported. And a huge part of that was, while I was a wellness advocate, really looking at different ways to keep students, engaged, being able to take care of themselves. And other things that we incorporate inside of our program is really looking at self-care. How do students take care of themselves? And in the first quarter of their courses in the general orientation, they're really asked, what do you do for self-care? If you're not doing self-care, then what will you incorporate to do self-care every single week? And so that's a huge part of, our work in behavioral health. How do you recruit students? We send out newsletters. They can be found on Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. They do a lot of our advertisements, but it's mostly in like tribal health organizations. Yeah. And then we also send out advertisements on our Facebook page for Northwest Indian College.
Thank you for sharing. And I just have one more question. In what ways do you hope for the students to share the behavioral health program with not only Northwest Indian College and the tribal community you work with, but with other healthcare facilities across the nation? What benefits do you see for other hospital facilities to incorporate Indigenous health?
So I think that Indigenous knowledge is very complex. And it really comes down to worldview, right? So we have a lot of different ways of teaching how to heal. And in more of like modern medicine, we really look at the physical parts and how we can fix a person physically. In behavioral health, we're really looking at not just the person's physical health, but we're also teaching our students about emotional health, mental health, and then the other parts, which is community, family, why are these things important? And in Indigenous health, we have different components for different things. So I think the way that students learn how their tribes helped one another, it really gives an overview for others outside of those communities to learn. And an example of this is, when we look at things such as our well-being for health, a huge part in behavioral health is looking at the psychology. So if you have a childhood trauma that has kind of shown up in your life, how do you deal with that? Or who's your support system? And in this world, we're not really taught how to deal with those things, right? Each one of us is going through this life kind of learning as we go, and it's really on the fly. And so for our behavioral health aides, they're learning like, how can I help someone else learn about this, right? And an example would be like for childhood trauma. How do you bring somebody from childhood trauma to learn about their childhood, what could be better for themselves and how they can reparent themselves? And this even looks into, how do we grieve? Are we properly grieving? And that's like a huge component when it comes to tribal communities and how our communities function when it comes to grieving. And it might be really helpful, for outside communities to learn how to have those types of support systems. In every single psychology case study, the biggest part is having a support system, having people who are on your side. And that's what kind of guides you to have those breakthroughs, or to have the ability to move through challenging situations. So I do feel like the behavioral health aides, they're really learning a lot about themselves, and then they're able to share their experiences. And many of them are parents, many of them are full-time employees, full-time students, and that's not very easy for a lot of people, but they're definitely determined.
Thank you. So we just have one last question before we go into a closing. So this question is, we notice people introduce themselves doing land acknowledgement at the beginning, and how and when is it appropriate for allies to do land acknowledgements respectfully?
I would say that, when it comes to land acknowledgement, it really comes down to the intention. There are different times where you might come into a space and you might feel like you're not fit to do the land acknowledgement. But the biggest part is the intention, making sure that you understand your space that you're at, right? And it doesn't matter if you're non-native or native to that place. And that's something that is taught through protocol for all Indigenous tribes. When you come into a space, you acknowledge that place, you acknowledge the people, and that really creates that relationship that you have from there.
Thank you for sharing, Kaya. And we just want to appreciate the work that you are doing again for the community and for helping pioneer and build more individuals in their experience and in their education in the behavioral health field. It is very much appreciated and very much needed in these times, and we only hope for it to continue to grow. Thank you. So we can go ahead and go into a closing, but before we do go into a closing, I would like to talk a little bit about the Peace Health St. Joseph Medical Center. They have dedicated much of their work into creating a Native liaison role. And recently we have just started this position. Monica Ravy is our first Native liaison at the Peace Health Network. So we would like to just share an acknowledgement and appreciation for our collaboration with the Northwest Indian Health Board for helping us create and pioneer this work in having a Native liaison in the hospital. So we lift our hands up to acknowledge the work of Monica Ravy, who joined our Peace Health team in September 2022. The Northwest, So the Northwest Indian Health Board has worked closely with Peace Health Network to launch this new collaboration of the Native Liaison Program. The Cooperative Services Agreement between Northwest Indian Health Board and Peace Health is focused on supporting the experience of care for Natives accessing Peace Health services. Monica Ravy is a Lummi tribal member and dedicated family woman. She is excited to be joining the Peace Health Care Management team. Monica brings her compassion to helping her own people. She has experience working as a case manager in the legal system, as well as a social services, and believes in hard work, sacrifice, and teamwork. She will be supported by the existing care management team and will build relationships with all Peace Health providers with the goal of improving the experience of care for Native patients. So we only hope to build more opportunities for Indigenous people to pioneer and to be able to build and create platforms, educational spaces, and to decolonize spaces, and to lead us on the way of harmonious work and working in balance with communities and individuals, and especially on Mother Earth, that we all share these resources. So thank you for everyone for participating in this Native Indigenous Heritage Month panel session. It is very much appreciated, and we only hope to continue this work and hope that it continues to build and network across Peace Health Network, our communities, and the nation. So here are some of the resources that we would like to share with you all today to educate yourself more about the Native history. Doing this work helps us recognize and build relationships and put together the puzzle to create a better future for our future ancestors and children who are yet to come. So we can visit also local exhibits and cultural centers and read published by Native Indigenous authors. Thank you all for being here. And so we are going to go into a closing gratitude and words. Let's see. So to close the space in a good way, I just want to close this in a prayer. I want this prayer to be acknowledged by the Creator and by those that we pray to, for honoring ourselves, our work that we do, for each and every one of us here who have been participant in this space and who are continuing to believe in the work that they do to build a better future. We also want to be blessed with the strength in our minds, in our body, our spirit, and our emotional well-being. We want this to continue to build not only within ourselves, but with our family, our friends, and our community, for this caregiving work to be able to be purposeful, not only for ourselves, but for the Indigenous lands that we are on, and for the Indigenous people who are the original caretakers of this land. We hope that the work that we do here continues to be blessed, and for the Creator to show us the way. Thank you for everyone for being here. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email me or some of the leadership here at Peace Health, such as Rachel, Vincent, or the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team. And if you would like to join or be a part of our Tribal Alliance group for check-ins or for any help in leadership or to build more community work and Tribal Alliance work within your Peace Health network, just feel free to contact us. And Ukiah Day's contact information will be in the chat box. Thank you all for being here and have a great day.